Hello and welcome to the North Carolina Museum of History and the 26th Annual American Indian Heritage Celebration. The presentation will begin in just a moment, but we want to take a few moments in the beginning for some notes. Remember to ask questions in the chat and we'll do our best to respond to them and share them with our presenter. We have many additional resources about American Indians in North Carolina on our website. We thank the following sponsors of the North Carolina Museum of History Foundation for helping to make this event possible. And with that, let's begin. Joel Queen is a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and a multi-talented sculptor, woodcarver, and ninth-generation potter. Joel's pottery incorporates both contemporary and traditional designs. Joel has worked to preserve the traditions of Cherokee pottery and revived Cherokee stamped pottery. Joel is joining us from his pottery studio near Cherokee, North Carolina. Joel, thank you so much for being here with us today.
I'd like to apologize to everybody for not being there in person. A lot of this has caused a lot of turmoil within individual families and individual companies, everything else. I would have much rather seen you in person, but we'll make do with what we got. I'd like to all welcome you to my home. How is everybody doing out there? Pottery is the first language of the Native Americans. In an archaeological record, that is the only surviving artifact that can be found that tells how a culture is doing. Depending on the hunter and gathering civilizations, when they actually started to settle down and leave a written record besides arrowheads, it's the only way that you can trace back where these people were from. Depending on the methods, depending on the style, depending on the decoration and the complexity of the patterns, is one of the few reasons I'll call this the first language of the Native Americans. We also have probably one of the oldest traditions of ceramics in the world. It actually started around Savannah, the Savannah River complex that dates back several thousand years before they actually thought it happened. It did not come from South America. It came from northern United States. We don't know what culture, what tribe. So it's just one of those things that archaeologists have a problem dealing with. But it is probably the only written record that we have of that Native Americans were dealing with ceramics, besides being a hunter and gathering civilization at the time. Baskets don't survive, but a tempered piece of clay will survive the eons of time. So far, we're looking at maybe back to, I think, 18 to 22,000 years at this site. And before that, if civilization was in South America, it would not have been here at that time. Then you go back to the red paint people, which actually had the red quartz arrowheads that were found in France and Germany. The only place you could find that was up around Nova Scotia. So that kind of gets close to blowing the Ice Age theory out of the water, especially the people that believe that we were here before that ever happened. Even though genetics may have done that, and it's not the first Ice Age that ever was built. What I'm doing right now is I'm making a bottom to a pot, and it's just something that I've pretty much self-taught. I mean, Ethel Bigmeat was my grandmother. Unfortunately, she died in 1942, and we didn't have a chance to work with her. I wasn't even born yet. But it's a couple of serious different various methods, and I've made a few alterations to myself, building the stair-step method. But I still start out with a...
How did you first learn how to make pottery? You mentioned being self-taught. Are you entirely self-taught?
No, I had a very nice teacher in high school. Well, Dee Smith started me on pottery. She was my elementary student teacher. And Aline Stamper. Juan taught me how to play with clay a little bit. Nothing fantastic. Aline taught me how to bead. And what happened was I never really paid much attention to it till I got to high school, junior high up through there. And a lady by the name of Patricia Kimbrell. She was the biggest influence on me. She taught me how to paint. She taught me how to do jewelry. She taught me how to do my own cutting down of gemstones. She taught me how to throw on a wheel. She taught me how to slab build. She also taught me how to build by hand. But unfortunately, during the age of Native American pride that took over everything, that she lost her job at Cherokee High School. And Pat was probably the most influential teacher I ever had in my life. And she showed me a book on pottery, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. Just the techniques and everything else, but the techniques that I was learning in that book coincided very, very carefully with what was going on in Cherokee at the time. But unfortunately, my people were making really thick walled pieces at the time. And it wasn't exactly what we were finding in the records of the archaeological digs and everything else, which was really thin walled pots that were fired up to around 11 to 1300 degrees. And I know a lot of people think, oh, you can't get that higher temperature in an open fire. Yes, you can, and you can sustain it using the right amount of woods. Jane Eastman was a professor I had at Western Carolina University, and we proved that we could sustain that temperature for up to 4 hours. So that blew that out of the record. And also in the archaeological record, they find broken pots in what they call mitten piles. And they would describe that as a place where they fired pottery. It wasn't fired that way. From what I understand, it was fired within the pits of the house itself over a slow, methodical period of heating during the winter or whatever. There was no group firing like you find in Africa. They didn't make a bunch of pots and fire them at one time. These were all done individually. And even in Georgia, one mistake on a stamped paddle, you could see the dispersion from that town out on the surrounding area. So there was a lot of trading during that time too. But as a whole, like I said, this was our first language. This is the only way we could transfer information from the past to the present. And we've been doing that for years. It's not been notarized. But to me, pottery it's kind of like born into my system. I didn't know why I picked it up so easily, and I didn't know why I took to it so much. I actually started out as a sculptor, a stone carver. Then went to wood at the Indian village of Cherokee. And instead of goofing off and playing around when I had a break, giving lectures, I actually went to each individual craft station and started learning what was going on and what they were doing. It was a very interesting time. I really, really don't understand. I mean, we may lose our language physically in Cherokee and verbally in Cherokee. And besides Tara McCoy, I don't know anybody else that's doing truly traditional pots here. But at the same time, you cannot stick to that. You have to make the culture evolve by making the artwork evolve. And that's one of the few things I've stressed. I'm a very hard person to get along with when it comes to artwork. I've studied my entire life on a lot of this stuff. And even the people that run the shops, like Vicky at the co-op, she don't understand what's going on in life with the native people itself. She's there for the money. I am here to keep the program going on. I don't produce as much as I used to because of health issues with torn up shoulders and everything else. But I still do produce, but not on the quantities that I did in the past. But starting with this, basically you make a little slab. And in the past, they've used wooden bowls, they've used gourds, whatever they needed to be able to make a round bottom for a cooking pot.
We have one audience question that might be good to ask here. How do you prepare the clay? Somebody asked, how do you mix the clay to make pottery? So what does the process look like up until this point to get that clay ready?
The process itself is you got to find a good clay vein. You can go to the river banks or streams, and it's depending on how the water flows and how it's cut in, you can get it from there. It's usually about anywhere from 2 to 6 feet below the earth. And if you can find an old meandering stream, you're going to find a clay bed in it. You can dig down through the surface next to the creek, and there's veins of it running through. Some of it is so pure that you don't even have to filter it. You can just dig it out of the bank and use it. We call it Hemp Hill A, is a geological term. The other term is a blue clay, and it's a micaceous clay. And it's basically impregnated with silica. Mica is nothing more than silica. And it acts as a binding agent and a refractory agent for thermal shock. But it can come straight out of the ground perfectly able to use. If not, you have to dig it out, dry it, crush it up, run it through a screen, or wet it back down and run it through a screen, make a slurry out of it, then slowly dry it and get all the impurities like the roots, bark, rocks, whatever that's too large to go through the screen system. But there are veins that are perfectly fine that you can dig straight out of the quarry and get it. It's like Franklin is noted for the Wedgwood porcelain that come out of there. But there are veins that you can find, especially on the old branches that have dried up a little bit, or small creeks that are kind of dried up. You can see the veins in it. And all I have to do is look at the banks, especially when it's slowed down after a big storm and cut through the basically the trough of the stream. You can find it laying in the banks. Reach your hand in there and gather it out. I'll give you an example. We were down here at the old elementary in Cherokee when they tore it down, and they were doing core samples. Some of the finest blue clay I'd ever seen come out of that area because it had been preserved in that field, where the river had meandered around, hit the rocks, and come back. And over the generations, it just piled up. Blue clay ain't nothing more than deposing granite, making a feldspar with the silica still remaining inside it. But yeah, it can be found naturally. And it is very good to find it because it is, the thermal shock value of this is phenomenal. You can fire up to a cone 10 with that. That's 2,886 degrees if I'm not mistaken. Or it can be low card as low as 1,100 and still be functional.
That's incredible. We also have a question here from Emily Grant. She says that it's great to see you and that she always learns something new when she hears you speak. She said, I didn't realize that pots were fired one at a time rather than in a group. Has that changed in more recent times? Do you still fire one pot at a time, and is there an advantage to that process?
It depends. If I have a lot of smaller pieces, I can fire them all at one time. The larger ones I do fire by themselves. It is monetarily wise, it's better to fire a whole group. But if you have a specific piece that is completely very, very extremely valuable, like going into competition and different shows, I will fire it by itself. But the majority of the smaller pieces I'll group together. I just don't allow them to touch. If one blows because of an air pocket, then it can take 2 or 3 other ones with it. So the smaller ones that make the money and pay the bills, the larger ones give you the reputation. So it's kind of a give or take question on that. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Emily, how you been doing?
She said, good. Need to go on another trip to Cherokee soon.
Well, she needs to give me a call. She's got my phone number. Or she may have my wife's, I'm not sure. I got to get this out of here. Basically, what we're looking at right here, I've taped the bowl to a banding wheel. And instead of using a gourd, I'm using looks like an old wok, a little round wok. But what you cover it with is something, it's kind of like a diaper, that if you can find good Gauze diapers or whatever anymore. And with a little pancake, put it right down the middle. That forms your base. And a lot of people call these wedges, I call them like mushrooms. But this is basically nothing more than a piece of clay that's been fired and used as an anvil to smooth the inside of the pot out. And later on, you'll have little polishing stones to go in and polish it inside if it's using for a cooking pot. But as a whole, that's about it. It's kind of hard to see doing this over the internet. On the inside of the pot, I'll give you a quick little demonstration of this if you can see it. Make that coil, and when you're rolling it out like this, you'll take, I'll kind of flatten it out a little bit and do that. This is just going to give you an example. Now, on the inside of that pot, I will take and form a stair step on that little pancake that I put in there. Kind of hard to demonstrate this over the internet, but then I'll take a row of water like that and put on there. And this is supposed to be the round part that's inside the bowl. And on this part, you'll make another coil. Do the same process. And if I had more room on this thing, I'd show you how to make a 4-inch coil. And then you'll take that part, put right on the stair step, and press it in. Be careful doing that and squeezing out as much of the air as you possibly can. This will give you an idea of what it looks like. I don't know if you can get closer or not. But inside the pot, you will pull down on the clay. On the outside, you'll pick it up a little bit and you'll smooth upwards. At the same time, making you a nice joint. Now, the finishing process takes a lot longer. You have to scrape it down, you have to smooth it out, you have to stamp it, you have to keep basically just babying it till it's ready. Well, like I said, it's kind of hard to do this on the internet. So, I don't know how I could show you how I do the inside of this. I'll try. I'll turn it up sideways here. What I'm doing right now is making a stair step on the inside. How has everything else been going while I'm doing this before I can turn it over to show you?
Can you repeat yourself? What did you say, sir?
I said, how has everybody else been doing? Since I can't really show you what I'm doing on the inside of it until I get it done. Now this, if you can see it, I'll show you this. I made that stair step around, trying to keep it circular as possible. And after that, where I've had to remove it, center it back up, and I use a little kid's play brush. Mm-hmm. Put a little bead of water around the top of that. When I'm in full production, I'll have a lot of these coils made before I ever start joining them up on wire. And I've done this so long, I've pretty much determined how much clay I need before I ever go in there. I started making pottery, I guess, probably about 8 or 9 years old. I had no idea who my family was until then. I had no idea that I was even part of the Big Meat family. I got to do one show, I think, with Louise, and that was at the Katua in Asheville when it started up.
While you're working on this, would you mind saying a little bit about what kinds of designs you incorporate into your pottery and what the significance of those designs are?
Well, the only true design that we have that is completely our own was a lightning bolt. there was a lot of intermingling with the tribes back then when they weren't fighting each other. So they say the friendship pattern is their first design, and I'm not sure if it is. It's a 4-line hash mark connected by an opposing 4-line. But we really don't know. Archaeologists have determined that this is a wind pattern, this is a water pattern. The 5 main tribes in the southeastern United States have very similar designs. We don't know exactly which designs mean what. So we leave that up to the archaeologists. It's been lost over time. Even the great Ely Katosta couldn't tell us what the designs meant. So we're guessing, we're shooting in the dark. If you want to honestly know, we're shooting in the dark.
Mm-hmm. Another audience member asked if the style of pot you're making today is more traditional or if it's something that is more your own unique style.
It's a combination of both. This pot will be a heavily designed or incised pot. I didn't bring any paddles up from the other studio simply because the internet's not down there.
Mm-hmm.
But it just really depends on what you want to do. I mean, polished black, the really, truly highly polished black, I think belongs to the Catawba with their oil firing. What I've done is combined different styles to do my own style of work. I mean, I can do a completely traditional style of work if you want to. But the formula clay I'm using today is one that I created when I was doing my master's. And yeah, we could have had rolling pins at one time, but it would have been made out of stone or wood, just a solid piece. I don't know. Never found one we found millstones that look like rollers, which could have been used. But from what I understand, a lot of the scraping was done by hand to thin the walls down. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if this style of coil that I make is one that I created. I mean, I honestly don't know where it came from. But looking at some of the older pots, especially at the mountain in Birdtown, there were a lot of thin-walled pots. And it's very, very hard to create those. So somebody had a lot of time on their hands to be able to do that.
Another person asked where would be a good place to find clay if they wanted to kind of start making pots.
Get on the geological maps of North Carolina, and anywhere you find this term on the topo map of Hip Hill A, that blue-gray clay will be there somewhere. That's the geological term for it. I've seen some of it in South Carolina when we went down there, but the farther south you go and the farther to the eastern part of the state you find, it gets harder to find. It turns red. But the micaceous clay, we're basically living in the oldest mountains in the world. So we got a lot of deposits up here. And if you get the right geological map, you can find it. If you look for the streams, especially the meandering old streams, you'll find clay. I don't know how deep it's going to be in certain areas, but you will find it. It may not be blue, it may be red, it may be orange, sometimes yellow, but it will all fire pretty much the same. The blue clay turns out to a buff color with the smoke clouds, kind of a grayish looking sometimes, but if it's fired correctly, you will see a tan pot come out of that. That's just a chemical reaction with the heat and the clay itself.
The person who asked that, her name is Sierra. She says she's out in the Piedmont near Durham. Do you know what the clay sources out there might look like?
Should be blue clay, especially if you go up to 5 Points. You know where that's at? Where the lake is?
She says no.
What's the main river going into the lake there next to Raleigh-Durham? Go to French Term.
She asks, is it tar?
Yeah.
The Haw.
It's north of Raleigh.
Okay.
If you look on that lake bed and the stream's going into it, you should be able to find a form of clay that's workable. I know I found pipestone up there before. When I would leave the show down here on a Sunday, we rode up there several times to gather stone to carve.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably about 30 minutes from Raleigh, huh? Get to that lake up there, yeah.
Okay, great.
Cross the second bridge and look on the lake bed. You'll find some.
That's good advice. She says, thank you very much.
She's more than welcome. Anywhere I go, I look for clay.
Mm-hmm.
I look for carving stone. I mean, I haven't done pipes in a long time. I haven't done any major stone sculptures because of the shoulder injuries. But other than that, yeah, I'll still look.
We have another audience question. You mentioned that you're a stone carver, wood carver, jewelry maker, weaver, as well as a potter. So what is it about that medium of pottery that appeals to you? What are the attributes or characteristics you would say are needed to be a gifted potter?
Time and practice. The love of keeping your culture alive, the love of being able to say that you've done something that can stand the test of time. Even stone weathers, but clay is usually broke, put in the ground, and survives. And like I said, that was our first language because we cannot determine what the artist was doing at the time when they were making that stone sculpture or making that basket. But we can determine what they were cooking by the residue left in the pots. And as storage containers, there's always going to be something on the geological term that separates that from everything else.
What advice would you give to someone who is just starting out as a potter?
Gather as much information as you can about the area you're in, especially the geological formations, to find the clay source, look up the history of the area, what style of work that was being done there, and look at your own culture to find out what niche you can find in the market to make it prevail. And even bad publicity is good. As long as your name gets out there and you determine that your work is more valuable than the criticism, then you can make it. But if you have any elders in your place, look at them, get some advice from them. They may know more secrets than you know. They can also help you out a lot. But other than that, I mean, trial and error is the best thing you can do. You're going to lose a lot, especially in hand building, until you can get the technique down good enough to where it'll survive the fire. And in an open pit, it's very difficult. I like doing an open pit firing, starting at about probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon, because I can determine what the heat's going to be when those pots start glowing around dusk. And that is, when you have a massive traditional pot come out, there's no more excitement in the world, especially when it survives. And it is a very difficult process.
Is it frustrating that the pot that you worked on doesn't survive that firing process?
Is there any replacement or how to fix it? Not in traditional firing, there's not. People have drilled holes in them and sewed them up with sinew and stuff if the rim cracked. Usually like a lace, trying to keep the rim from breaking any farther. Kind of looking at if you spend 2 weeks on a big cooking pot and it cracks during firing, you want to try to salvage it as much as possible. And that is possible by lacing it up like that to keep it from the expansion joint going back and forth. But in the long run, it's eventually going to crack anyway. Even a good, perfect cooking pot will crack eventually. There's nothing more you can do with it. Like I said, the potters,
Make sure he knows that it's Emily Grant.
Okay.
I don't know what it would have been like in the past, how the potters were, how they were respected in the tribe or whatever. But one thing's for sure, I'll always have something to cook in. And people always need bowls. So somewhere down the line, that skill will come back in handy.
Emily Grant asks if there's something that you would like to make or do with pottery that you haven't done yet. What dreams do you have for your work in the future?
She would ask a hard question. At this point in time, I honestly don't know. I hadn't thought about it that much. I hadn't been producing that much. This COVID thing really put people behind. I mean, I don't give you an idea. I've been climbing and cutting trees out over people's houses just to have fun. I'm getting bored with everything. I just don't know. I'm an adrenaline junkie anyway.
Maple asks, is there a way that you have to get the air bubbles out of the clay before you can do anything else with it?
Kneading it, yeah. If you're very careful with the clay, when you, especially traditional clay, when you pour it out to let it solidify a little bit, there ain't no way that you can jog it because it'd be heavy, and especially the way I do it. I pour it on canvas and just let it air dry till it's kneadable. But basically, say this is several pieces of clay like this. And you know you're going to have air pockets if you ball it up. What I usually do is go like that. I'll push, pull, and make a wedge out of it. Add a little water to it when it starts drying out, but you eventually push the waters out. And the reason I use the stair-step method on the pot and put water on that rim like that is when I put that coil in there, I press it with my thumb around that step, and that keep the water out. Now on the smaller pieces, you can actually push it like this with your hands. Pieces start to dry out. Just add a little water to it and keep it going. That's one of the reasons I use the roller pins when I'm making the coils. If there's an air pocket in there, it will show up. Just poke it with a pin, put a little water on it, and push it down. We'll try this one here in a second. But start your coil out by squeezing it first like that and stretching it as far as you can. But when you start to roll it, spread your fingers out like this, like a fan, and it'll push your clay. It will also allow that coil to go out farther. Then the second process to make sure that there are air bubbles, start pushing it down. You have to actually hit it pretty hard. But be sure that you don't go below 1/4 of an inch, because you take that smaller roller pin and you go across it. And use your fingernails or your thumbs and your forefinger to determine how thick that coil is going to be. There you have. That is almost 1/4 of an inch. Now be careful if you go any thinner, because the clay, once the water evaporates, it'll shrink even farther. Then you have to be real careful on how you scrape it and smooth it out. But with this style, I mean, clay is a forgiving medium to work in. It's also a cheap medium. Well, if you got the backbone to do natural clay, it does get kind of backbreaking. And a lot of times when I use that roller, the air pocket will show up. And then, like I said, you just take it like a little needle or something and poke it, and then slowly push the air out of it. Then that coil will set right down on that stair step. And see, this one's a little short. I'm using a small table because of room. Now this coil right here, we're going to see how it does. It's one I needed up.
Mr. Queen, somebody asked, Doran asked, are there any tips you have for cooking in these clay pots, or things that you might want to avoid if you wanted to cook in a clay pot?
These pots are used to cook on an open fire. They're not used to be directly put into the fire. What happens is you'll have your stones set up to where the pot is sitting next to the fire, and you slowly turn it and heat it up. At the same time, you put your water, your vegetables, and everything in it. Then you start moving your coals around it. It don't directly come to a boil, but it will simmer over a period of hours cooking everything. Me and Tammy Bean at the museum in Cherokee, we actually cooked our lunch out of these pots. We made our own stew out of it. Very good. Something else I forgot. Larry and Cammy, they actually showed me how to fire in an open pit. I didn't know how to then. And my first run was very disappointed. Out of 13 pots, I had one survive. I don't even know where that pot is anymore. But anytime you have a lapse in your clay, go ahead and put some water on it and make sure you can push it in and get the air pockets out of it. But I need to call Tammy. I haven't talked to her in a while. Last time I talked to her was a couple of years ago. She came up to Cherokee to do the museum thing. I've been off the market for a long time, though. I mean, I kind of got burned out on doing the art shows and everything.
Mm-hmm.
One of the high points was going to the museum in North Carolina because I could actually relax without much stress on me. It takes a lot of pressure to do a show.
I can imagine.
Especially when you're traveling across the United States to get to one. It's nice to be able to go somewhere and just have fun and relax a little bit.
Right. Emily Grant asked if there's a piece of art that you would say you're the most proud of.
Yeah, it's sitting down there in the museum. If you knew the mathematics it took to create that syllabary pot. I spent, 6 weeks on that thing? It was about 6 weeks just creating that.
Wow.
The measurements, the calculations, the lettering, everything. I mean, it was an old Solly's original writing, not the modern version. That's the old style. But yeah, that's the only one I've ever made like that too.
Can you describe what that pot looks like for people who may not have been able to see it yet?
It's a big round one with 76 characters around it, starting at the top with the friendship pattern, 3 bands of lettering, all 2 inches apart. And the bottom is it's all bottom and top of both friendship patterns, if I'm not mistaken. But there's 3 bands of lettering around the girth. It's probably a 30-gallon pot. And just the mathematics behind it was stifling. Because of the circumference of the round pot, you had to determine how the letters would fit within a certain parameter, keeping everything even. And within 3 bands, all 76 letters were placed.
Wow.
And we had the original writing of Sequoia to be able to put on there, and that was given to me by the Museum of the Cherokee Indian at the time. But I spent weeks doing that pot. I mean, it was, I don't know. That was an act of love. It's, like I said, it's the first one and the only one I've ever done.
That's incredible.
That pot went all over the United States before it got back there. That was the last place it was shown, and it was added to the collection at the museum. But it was a very difficult pot to make. I mean, you can use a computer now to do all the graphics and everything to show you how to lay it out, but this was all done in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I had several headaches over that.
That is truly impressive.
But it was that's probably the pot I'm most proud of. Even the one that beat the Santa Clara and Santa Fe, I'd rather have the Sequoia pot. You know, that was really my best work I've ever done on that.
Well, I want to remind our audience that we only have a few moments left, so if you have any additional questions, go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll try and get through them. Would you say that there's anything about your craft that's changed over the years?
I guess the evolution of culture. I mean, for the culture to evolve, the artwork has to evolve also. I've made copper coiled baskets. Nobody was doing that at the time. And instead of making the little bitty miniatures, I was making them 3 foot tall. And that trend started, and people copied my design and got more notoriety out of that than me, which I don't mind. They've done something nice. They combined the copper with their native splints and at the time. As a truly industrial piece, copper could be set outside until people started stealing everything for recycling. It would have been beautiful to see interpretive piece of artwork after the shiny went away, doing the progressive patina, turning it blue and everything. I would have loved to have seen that. The 5 baskets I made are all in private collections now.
Where can people see more of your work?
That's a good question. Probably Native American has the collection right now to see. Lambert Wilson is opening up a new Queen Gallery up there at the old Queen Trading Post across from the Dairy Queen going toward the National Park. The museum has several of my pieces, but I've not been making production enough to be able to carry a lot of shops. I mean, I don't know how to explain it. I got tired. I said I was an adrenaline junkie. When I quit traveling, competition kind of died away. I didn't have to thrive off that no more. Politics got involved in the shows, and I didn't care for that too much. I don't know. The best thing is to do is text me if you want to see some work. All I've been doing is just taking private orders, and that's it. I even shut my own gallery down. I got tired. The walls started closing in. I had to get back to nature a little bit. And I had to find something else that made me enthusiastic about what I was doing. There are specific things that I want to do yet. And I have designs in my head. I've just not drawn them out yet. But for beginning potters, I would suggest that you write your ideas down, because somewhere down the road, they will come back to you. And once you master the medium you're in, then you come back to that original design and do it. And I will be honest with you. If you're going into pottery, plan on the first 5 years of being trial and error. It is a slow process to get to where you want to go. Unless you have an absolutely wonderful teacher, it's going to take you a long time to get to where you go.
Yes, sir. That makes sense. Well, we are needing to wrap up soon here. One final question is, how can people contact you if they have additional questions or would like to purchase a piece of yours?
Text me, 828-788-0336.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate you being here with us today and sharing your knowledge and your craft. This has been amazing, and we really appreciate it.
Well, I thank you very much for inviting me. I wish this could have been in person.
We do
a lot more informative.
We do too. Hopefully next year. We would love to see you soon.
Thanks to all guests. Thank you to the Museum of History, and thanks to the sponsors.
Yes, sir. All right.
Have a nice afternoon.
Everyone have a great day. Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.